Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. 5 players that need to step up for the Oregon Ducks in this spring practice window over the next couple of weeks. And not only do I think this is a fascinating conversation to have within this Oregon Ducks program, I think this team in general is one of the more intriguing teams that we see in the country heading into spring practice where look, I think there's a lot of people that look at this Oregon roster and say, well, you're losing a lot of talent to the NFL draft. But I think a lot of Oregon fans who follow this program pretty damn closely say, yeah, we're losing a lot of good football players. We ain't going to argue that. We also got a lot of young players that are kind of ready to take that step going into 2025. Who are these players going to be? That's what we're going to figure out during spring practice. One of my overarching takes that we've had a lot over the last couple of weeks is this team seems it's the deepest team that Dan Lanning has had during his time in Eugene, Oregon. You can tell that he's going into year 4 now. You can tell that he's stacked the high school recruiting classes the way he wants to stack them. He's supplemented through the transfer portal, and you look at this roster and say, look, it's really hard to predict what this depth chart is going to look like come August in 2025, but you have a pretty good feeling that it's going to be a really good football team because the amount of competition top to bottom on this roster, it's real. There's a lot of really good football players that are challenging for starting spots on this Oregon team going into 2025. That's what national championship caliber programs look like going into spring practice. Dan Lanning has that. He finally has that competitive depth that he's been looking for. Fired up to get into this one. Before we do, and as always, to the Oregon fans, y'all let it fly in the comment section. I got to give a shout out to the Oregon fans. There ain't many fan bases that are as dialed in to football in the month of March than the Oregon fans, and we've been going back and forth in the comment section. We've been going back and forth on Twitter trying to predict this depth chart. I mean, we're talking depth charts in the month of March. It's been a blast for me. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Let it fly in the comment section. Without further ado, let's get into it. Let's talk about a player that we really haven't talked about over the last 2 months, and that is Bear Alexander. That's great if you're an Oregon fan. The fact that we haven't talked about him, because what does that mean? He's kind of put his head down and just gone to work within this Oregon program. And we said this when Dan Lanning took his commitment back in the transfer portal. Yeah, maybe it's a little bit of a risk, but the upside that you're getting with Bear Alexander, if he puts it all together, it's going to be massive. And I think the best case scenario is Bear Alexander puts his head down and works within this program for the next 8 months and then just kind of pops up and dominates college football in 2025. That is certainly a possibility. In the fact that we haven't really heard from Bear Alexander during his time during winter workouts heading into spring practice, to me, that's a good thing because that means he's dialed in and getting better as a football player. Why is this such a big storyline? One, look, we've seen the flashes. The flashes of Bear Alexander is one of the more dominant defensive linemen that we see in the sport. Why is this such a big storyline specifically for Oregon? We're looking at how do we take that next step? We know we're a college football playoff team. We know we're one of the best teams in the country. How can we become the number 1 team in the country? How can we win that national championship? It starts on the defensive line. You go back and look historically at programs that have won the national championship. Georgia 2021, Georgia 2022, Michigan 2023, Ohio State 2024. They've all had elite defensive lines. If Oregon's defensive line is elite in the 2025 year, you know damn well that Bear Alexander is going to be playing a role in that. Can Oregon take that step on the defensive line? Bear Alexander, going to be a big storyline. And a guy that I'm very optimistic about can really step up in spring ball. Number 2 on the list, and y'all got me back in on my guy, Aaron Flowers. The Oregon fans who've been rocking with the fellas for a while, way back when Aaron Flowers committed to this Oregon program, you guys know how I feel about Aaron Flowers. I think he's just an absolute football player. He can do a lot of different things. Love what he can do in the box, tackling. And what's fascinating about Aaron Flowers, or what's fascinating about where Oregon is right now, is Dylan Tiemann is starting at one of those safety spots, right? He's one of the best, if not the best safety in the country outside of Caleb Downs in the country. Who's going to start at the other safety spot? You got Aaron Flowers. You got Kingston Lopa. You got Peyton Woodyard. It's a good spot to be in. You feel good about one of those three guys stepping up and being a difference maker for Oregon in the 2025 year. You talk about competitive depth. That's what you want it to look like. Why am I going with Aaron Flowers? Probably because he is, in my opinion, the best athlete in the back end. And what have we been talking about with Oregon? We're going to talk about it with another football player coming up is we got to get faster in the back end, specifically at the linebacker and safety spots. If there was one glaring problem with this Oregon defense in that Ohio State game, we did not have linebackers and safeties that could run and deal with the playmakers that Ohio State had. If you want to win a national championship, you're going to have to go through teams like Ohio State, like a team like Texas that have legitimate difference makers on the outside. We need our linebackers to play in space, and we need our safeties to at times hold up in coverage and go cover a lot of ground in the back end. Aaron Flowers, 6 foot plus, 200 plus, 33-inch arms. He's got a really big wingspan. He's got a 76-inch wingspan. He's long. I think he's one of those guys that could be the difference maker that Oregon needs in the safety spot that Oregon probably did not have in 2024. And again, that conversation is not, I think Kobe Savage was a bad football player, or not, I think Tasheem Johnson was a bad football player, but they weren't the caliber athletes needed to deal with teams like Ohio State on a consistent basis. Aaron Flowers, Kingston Lopa, Peyton Woodyard, those are those kind of athletes that Oregon's looking for. Who steps up? I'm back on the Aaron Flowers train going into 2025. Number 3 on the list, and obviously a huge storyline, the quarterback spot. The rhetoric around Dante Moore on Twitter, on the message boards, is criminal, in my opinion. The amount of people that are just chalking Dante Moore to being a 5-star bust is wild to me. And guess who else got talked about as a 5-star bust before he transferred to Oregon? Yeah, Bo Nix. Bo Nix and Dante Moore, very similar conversations in terms of career trajectories, where Bo Nix went to Auburn, Dante Moore went to UCLA. They were both young quarterbacks and offenses that flat out stunk. You go back to Dante Moore was under pressure 45% of dropbacks. He got sacked on 11% of dropbacks. That offensive line was a disaster. Did not have pass catchers on the outside that could go make plays for him, and he struggled. You could name me any true freshman that you wanted over the last 10 years. You plopped him in that UCLA offense that we saw in 2023. Doubt very many are having a ton of success. What I'm looking for from Dante Moore is 2 things. One, can you do the small things right? Because you look at Dante Moore and say the arm talent that this kid has, in my opinion, he's the most talented quarterback that Oregon has had under Dan Lanning. Yeah, and it's not a shot at Bo Nix. It's not a shot at Dylan Gabriel. It's just I think Dante Moore's that guy. As a Michigan fan who's followed Dante Moore ever since he was coming out of high school from the state of Michigan, there ain't many guys that can spin it like Dante Moore. But can you do the small things right? We all know you can make the jaw-dropping throws. We saw them during your time at UCLA as a freshman. Can you do the small things right? And can you be consistent like Bo Nix and Dylan Gabriel were? The second thing, can you be a little bit more of a difference maker athletically at the quarterback spot? That's not me getting up here and saying Dante Moore needs to be Lamar Jackson, but it is getting up here and saying, hey, I want to see Dante Moore get himself out of trouble. And when it's time to get outside the pocket, throw off platform, buy a little bit of time, be able to make some things happen when plays are breaking down. That's a trait that every elite quarterback, both at the collegiate and NFL ranks, has. Can Dante Moore be that guy from an athletic standpoint? And again, it doesn't have to be Lamar Jackson, but it can, Dylan Gabriel was very good at this. Bo Nix was very good at this. Getting yourself out of trouble sometimes. If you want to be a great quarterback, that is a trait you need to have in this modern era of college football. Can Dante Moore, who I will say this, has transformed his body. Coming out as a freshman, he was not the greatest athlete coming out of high school. He looks the part. When you look at him in winter workouts, he's looked like he's got that body right. Now, can he go make it happen there in 2025? It's going to be a quarterback battle, I think, because that's how Dan Lanning operates. You ain't going to start if you don't earn it in spring and fall camp. Austin Novosad, Luke Moga, those are 2 talented quarterbacks, but I do think Dante Moore will be the quarterback 1. And can we see him take those steps necessary to be a legitimate Heisman caliber quarterback, of which he certainly has the capability to be. Number 4 on the list, very similar conversation, Devon Jackson. We just talked about Aaron Flowers, Oregon needing to get just a little bit more speed on the football field on defense. We kind of ignored the step that Devon Jackson took. And I think he kind of got overshadowed because Bryce Betcher was so good for Oregon in 2024. Devon Jackson was not, necessarily a starter because you had Bryce and Jeff Bassa, but he played he played over 400 snaps for Oregon. You talk about Oregon kind of taking that next step as a defense, being a little bit more fast and a little bit more athletic. You're not going to find you're probably not going to find a single linebacker that has the speed that Devon Jackson does. 10-5 guy coming out of high school in the 100-meter dash. You saw him start to put it together between the years. We all know physically he's about as gifted as it gets. Could he put it together between the years? We saw a step in 2024. Can we see another step in 2025? And if Devon Jackson does take that step, you're looking at one of the best backers in the Big Ten and arguably the country. Number 5 on the list, Jurrion Dickey. We got to talk about him, and it's funny because we haven't really talked about him all that much for Oregon over the last 12 months. There's a lot of people who are quick to write him off, a 5-star bust, so to speak. There's been some growing pains the first 2 years. 2 things that are probably worth noting. One, he dealt with some injuries, which is hard when you're young and you're dealing with injuries and you got to get on the football field to kind of get acclimated to the collegiate ranks and you can't. That's inherently kind of going to stunt your growth a little bit and stunt your development. And secondly, let's not act like Oregon's wide receiver room has been bad the last 2 years. Guys like Troy Franklin, Tez Johnson, Trayshawn Holden, Evan Stewart, especially with the guy like Terrence Ferguson, who's going to play a lot. It's hard to get on the football field the last 2 years if you're a wide receiver at Oregon. And so just because Jurrion Dickey did not play over a guy like Evan Stewart or did not play over a guy like Trayshawn Holden, especially as a freshman and sophomore, does not mean he's a bad football player. The wide receiver room is up for grabs going into 2025. You have Evan Stewart coming back. I slot him as that wide receiver 1. You have Jurrion Moore coming in as a true freshman who I think is going to be a guy for Oregon early in his career. Outside of that, you got Malik Benson, who's intriguing. Got Gary Bryant, who's intriguing. Got Jeremiah McClellan, who's intriguing. But you also have a guy like Jurrion Dickey, who I feel like not many people are talking about, but a guy that certainly could be a difference maker for this Oregon passing attack in the 2025 year. And what I love most about him is you're going to see a little bit more verticality in this Oregon offense. With Dillon Gabriel in 2024, it was a lot of quick game because that's where Dillon Gabriel operates the best. And Will Stein built an offense that kind of suits Dillon Gabriel's skill set. With Dante Moore, and the way he can throw the deep ball, and the way he can attack the boundary, you're probably going to see these boundary wide receivers, guys like Jurrion Dickey and Evan Stewart, have more opportunity than they've had the last couple of years. We knew that Tez Johnson was going to be the leading receiver for Oregon in the 2024 year because that's the type of wide receiver Dillon Gabriel wants to throw to. Dante Moore wants to attack vertically. He wants to attack the boundary. And so these boundary wide receivers are going to have much more involvement in the offense. And can Jurrion Dickey be that guy that steps up? Again, you talk about competition. You look at the defensive backfield. You look at the wide receiver room. It's you don't know who's going to start. Last year at this time, we kind of knew what Oregon's starting roster was, or starting depth chart was going to be because we had a lot of guys returning. Now you don't necessarily know what it's going to look like, but you have a feeling it's going to be pretty good because if you beat out a guy like Jurrion Dickey to get on the football field, chances are you're going to be a pretty good football player. Really, really exciting. If I were to throw one more kind of group of positions I'm looking for as those year 2 defensive linemen, I think Dan Lanning knows the recipe because he was part of the recipe at Georgia. You got a dominant defensive line, you're going to play good defense. Spent a lot of time building that pipeline of defensive linemen. I'm talking about Aiden Breland. I'm talking about Jericho Johnson. I'm talking about Tyone Graham. I'm talking about Elijah Rushing. You got 4, maybe 5 guys that we're looking at there. Can 2 or 3 of them step up and really be contributors? That's another storyline as well. We'll cut it there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later.